Welcome to another bonus episode of the Virtual Memories Show. This one's a doozy. It is the audio from last weekend's memorial service for Tom Spurgeon at the Billy Ireland Cartoon Library and Museum in Columbus, Ohio. Tom died suddenly in November 2019. He was my closest friend, and I was honored to be among the speakers at his memorial. I posted my 10-minute segment last week for Tom's birthday, and it's included in this full-length episode. Now, I talked all about Tom in the intro to that one, as well as the repost of the 2012 episode we recorded, so I am not going to go into more detail now about his importance in my life. Hit chimeraobscura.com/VM or look up the Virtual Memories Show on iTunes, and you can find those episodes. You can find out a lot more about Tom and the role he played in people's lives by reading the wonderful obituary by Andy Downing of Columbus Alive. There's a link to that in this episode's show notes. Now, the service featured a dozen speakers, followed by open comments from Tom's friends. This recording will be a part of the permanent archive at the Billy Ireland Library, and I'm so glad I can contribute something to preserve Tom's memory. All the speakers gave me permission to include their segments in this episode. Since you may not make it to the end in one sitting, I want to take this time to thank everyone who spoke at the event and to thank Caitlin McGurk and Rebecca Damson for inviting me to be part of it. I'm planning to hold a memorial service for Tom in New York City on January 24th, 2020, modeled somewhat along these lines, except more open comments, less planned stuff. If you're interested in attending that, please drop me a line. I'm not going to do a lot of explaining or contextualizing the speakers. Everyone pretty much explains who they are. Here they are: Whit Spurgeon, Sonny McFerrin, Rob Eidson, Dan Wright, Fred Herring, Eric Reynolds, Jordan Raphael, me, Jeff Smith, Laurenn McCubbin, Rebecca Perry Damson, and Caitlin McGurk. And here are the people who spoke in the open mic segment: Bruce Crislip, Christian Hoffer, Carol Tyler, Evan Dorkin, Darcy Hoffer, Sheena Wolf, and James Moore. Thanks, all of you, for being brave enough to stand up on stage and recount your memories and feelings about Tom for the rest of us. Again, it's an honor to have been among you. Now, a couple of caveats. People's notes ruffle over my digital recorder a couple of times. Not everybody was speaking directly next to it, so audio levels are a little funny. Also, Rob spoke from the middle of the stage instead of at the podium, so I had to stitch in the audio for his part from his friend's iPhone videos. There's a weird whistling sound that happens in the background over the first hour. Couldn't get rid of that without causing the rest of the audio to come out weird. And there was a slideshow going on throughout, projected on screens behind the speaker, so sometimes the audience is laughing over some of the great images of Tom that were up on screen. And Dan Wright had his own slideshow, which he refers to during his piece. There's a link to it in the show notes for this one, so you'll be able to watch and hear his entire shebang all over. And now, Tom Spurgeon's memorial service from December 14th, 2019 at the Billy Ireland Cartoon Library and Museum in Columbus, Ohio.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Tom Spurgeon loved comics. Tom was born into a comics-loving family. When Tom was a kid and brother Dan was a very little kid, and I was a preteen, our father, wily Bill Spurgeon, managing editor at the time for the Muncie Star, started bringing home publicity packets of new comic strips that were lobbying to be included in the paper. He said he wanted our opinion on the strips. Dad took the responsibility of placing comics in the local paper very seriously. He told us that even when you replaced what you might consider to be a terrible strip with a new one, that terrible strip was always someone's favorite strip, and at least a few dozen people would cancel their subscriptions to the paper once you replaced it. The only reason I bought your rag was to read that comic, and now it's gone. Now, these publicity packets that my dad received from the comic strip syndicates were a glorious thing for a kid to dive into. Usually a combination of a couple dozen daily strips and a half dozen Sundays, trying to woo a newspaper into trying a strip out. Tom and I at least, would devour these hungrily. I think Dan was probably too young at the time, and give our opinions. I remember in particular both of us liking, weirdly upon reflection of how young we were at the time, Shoe. Now, whether our opinions ever really changed Dad's mind on whether to run a strip, I have no idea, but it sure was fun for us to think so. We also collected comic books. I started at 7 and was exposed at a far too early age to the death of Gwen Stacy, which may explain some of my unique psychological issues. Tom followed suit. Brother Dan had other interests, although he'd read a few comics with us every now and then as well. Around age 11, I became interested in other things, girls, acting, movies, and I stopped collecting. Tom continued, and I'd occasionally read for old time's sake an Incredible Hulk or Avengers or Thor that Tom had picked up at the local drugstore. Then when I was 16, Tom, who at age 12 was already becoming clear was maybe smarter than the rest of the family combined, came to me and suggested I might want to look into comics again. They're different than when you stop collecting with. There's more adult stuff coming out, better writing, he said, or something along those lines. Now, whether he told me this out of brotherly love and concern or because he knew that with a driver's license I could drive him to the better comics store about 60 miles away from Muncie in Indianapolis, I'll never know. But Tom was right. Comics were better. And we dove together into titles at the time like Love and Rockets, Cerebus, Nexus, Badger, and Zot. And my lifelong love affair with comics was cemented because of Tom. At the age of 12, Tom was already converting people to his great obsession. Eventually, I went to Syracuse University to study acting, and the year I graduated from Syracuse, Tom went to Washington and Lee University to study pre-law with, he told me, the idea that he might become an entertainment lawyer someday. We remained in close touch, and one of the things we always talked about was whatever new comic had come out that one or the other of us loved. We maintained a collection together, with some of the comics residing with me and some residing with him. Now, by the time Tom graduated from Washington and Lee, he had decided he wasn't as enthused about becoming a lawyer as he had been when going into college. He told me he wasn't sure he'd be comfortable doing some of the things that lawyers are by their profession ethically required to do. Tom had always been one of the more spiritual members of our family, so it wasn't a complete surprise when he went to Garrett Evangelical Seminary following college. Once Tom got out of seminary, he drifted a little, like most of us in our 20s do. He took a job in Pennsylvania with QVC, the home shopping folks, and there are some stories there, but I'm not telling them now. Then he accepted the job that would pretty much cement the direction of the rest of his life. He was hired as the managing editor of the Comics Journal. Now, long story short, from that point on, Tom pursued with vigor the thing he loved the most, comics, in all iterations, from strips to books to graphic novels, right down into the most finite history of the medium. And through his years of comics criticism, of writing reviews and books, and launching and maintaining his incredible 3-time Eisner Award-winning website, The Comics Reporter, of writing the incredible daily strip, Bobo's Progress, with his childhood friend, the amazingly talented artist Dan Wright, and finally, ending up in Columbus to help found and run what many consider to be one of the best comics conventions in the world, Cartoon Crossroads Columbus. Tom did what so many of us only dream of. He spent most of his life writing about, advocating for, and making a living from something he really, truly loved. Now, Tom was born to be a critic. I have on my person a copy of Tom's first grade student evaluation from Mrs. Harris, who was also my first grade teacher and our younger brother Dan's first grade teacher as well. She was a good teacher. We really liked her. 4 categories on the evaluation describing Tom. Reading, above average. Math, above average. Writing, average. He clearly improved. Here's my favorite. Behavior comments. This is about a 7-year-old. It would be to Tom's advantage to be more tactful. Now, Tom's criticism, not only in comics but in anything, could be cutting, but it was incredibly incisive and rarely off base. Maybe the hardest thing about getting critical feedback from Tom was the fact that if your feelings were hurt, once he got over that, he usually realized he was right. Because Tom saw not only the talent in talented people, but the potential. And he always knew that no matter how good you already were, you could be even better. He was also blisteringly, relentlessly funny. And I'll use a favorite tale from his brief stint reviewing theater for The Stranger, Seattle's alternative newspaper, to illustrate. Christmas of one year, the paper sent him out to review several different productions of A Christmas Carol, running simultaneously at different theaters in the city at the time. Tom told me that one was pretty good, two were just okay, but he gave all three of those productions pretty good reviews because, hey, it's A Christmas Carol, and he wanted to be supportive of the local theater scene. But one production was so brutally terrible that it was one of those theater experiences where you're not only not enjoying yourself, you're actively angry at the theater for subjecting you to the awfulness of their production. And his review was scathing, but best summed up by his final line of the review: "Give yourself the gift of not going." It was inevitable, though, that Tom would find his true north in comics. Tom found meaning in comics. He admired and loved what comics creators do, the worlds you all create. So much so that his greatest desire was that you would all be the best artists and writers you could be, and that you could prosper and be happy doing so. Toward the end of his life, he had even begun to speak about helping to create a union for comics creators to help make those things happen. Tom found a family in comics. He had us, his family by birth, and friends from all walks of life. But his adult extended family was the comics community and the wonderful creators that are part of it. He traveled all around the country and the world to be with that family. To Tom's Muncie friends, many of whom have come here today to pay tribute, we thank you. You helped him grow up to become the creative and loving person that Tom was. To Tom's academic friends, both at Washington and Lee and Garrett Evangelical Seminary, we thank you for setting Tom on a path that would ultimately lead him to his true calling and the happiness he found in it. To Tom's comics friends, thank you for being his extended family and providing him with friendship, love, and purpose in life. You admired Tom, but Tom really admired all of you so much. To all of you, but especially to the many of you who have told me that Tom convinced you not to quit when you were struggling, your art and writing are a tribute to Tom and proof that his legacy lives on. Finally, to the city of Columbus and all of Tom's friends here, thank you for welcoming him, loving him, and making this his home. Tom was never happier in the years since he began living in Columbus. That really says something. This was his favorite place. He loved being here. And that really says something about this city and the people in it. Today we're sad that we lost Tom so soon, but I think it's important to note that Tom achieved more than most people will ever achieve in a life twice as long. So let's celebrate that. A life so well lived and so filled with enormous accomplishments and great friendships. The best way we can celebrate Tom, and I think Tom would agree, is to continue doing the things that Tom would do if he were still with us. So support your friends and fellow artists. Encourage those talented people that you know are about to give up the artistic fight to keep making art, to keep writing, to keep creating. Help each other when you're in need. Be kind and encouraging to each other creatively and in all things. Help make each other better, and help make your world better by continuing to fight for the things Tom believed in. A better world for creators and artists of all kinds, but especially for those who create comics. This is the greatest tribute you can offer to Tom Spurgeon, and the best way to thank him for all he's done. He loved you all. Thank you. Where'd the list go? Next, my mother, Sonny McFerrin.
With my 77-year-old memory, I've brought notes, so forgive that. I thought you might enjoy some stories of Tom in his very early years, because he was a very unusual child. and demonstrated several traits that some of you will recognize from later years. He was a happy, laughing baby. He particularly chuckled a lot, and I'm sure some of you remember Tom's chuckle. When he was about 18 months old, and Tom always had a lot of curiosity about things and a sense of adventure, he had a little scooter that he propelled around the house. This being in Indiana, I let him do it indoors. So one day I'm at the sink doing dishes, and I know Tom's running around on, pedaling around on his scooter. And I suddenly looked around and realized he had this huge grocery paper bag over his head. After I stopped laughing, and after I then took a picture, which is among the many here, and after I talked him into letting me take the bag off, I said, "Why the bag, Tom?" And he looked at me and said, "More fun." About 2 months after that, I brought home Dan from the hospital, Tom's younger brother. And as you may know, Tom was very persistent in his beliefs. So he looked up at me, and with this wide grin on his face, he said, pointing to the bundle in my arms, he said, "Dog?" And knowing how Tom could be, I immediately sat him down and said, no, this is Dan, your little brother. He's going to be living with us. And when he gets older, you guys can play together. And Tom's nodding sagely through all this, so I thought, okay, got my point across. 2 hours later, I had left Dan in one of those little slant boards on the living room sofa, and I walked back in to check on him. And Tom is sitting there beside him with his hand on Dan's cheek, saying, "Arth, Arth." Some of you may also know that Tom was very good at defending his friends. There was one classic story time in our family when Tom must have been about 4 and a half. Dan was 3. I was in the living room, and all of a sudden I hear this cry from the family room, Mom, Tom's hitting me." So I go dashing in. This is not an unusual happening if you have 3 sons, but so I go dashing into the family room, and Tom is standing there, very solemn, very straight, like a little soldier, and he says, "Mom, I did not hit him. He ran into my fist." Finally, and to understand this story, you have to understand that all of my family tend to be writers. None of us are artists. We love art. We love cartoons. We love Picasso. We love realists. We love whoever. Impressionists, I particularly love. And we've gone to art museums everywhere. But between us, we can't draw a straight line. So I was really surprised one day when Tom was 6, when he showed me this really good drawing he had done of Spider-Man. But what really tickled me was, and Tom read and wrote very early, what tickled me was in the bottom right-hand corner. It said, "This is a poster. 25 cents, please." In retrospect, years later, I remember thinking, Tom may have realized there was some money to be made in comics, but very little. But what I really wanted to share with you today, Tom in 2016 wrote some notes to be opened if he passed away. And the final paragraph, you know, the early stuff was he wanted to be cremated and who got what and whatever. The final paragraph was so quintessentially Tom that I want to read it to you. He said, "I had an amazing life, and my love for my family is unsurpassed, followed nearly as much as the love for my closest friends. Be kind to yourselves. And live in laughter as much as possible. I love you. Thanks for everything." Thank you all for being here.
Rob Idson.
I'm not used to being saddled. Can you hear me in the back? If not, I'll use the mic. In the back, if you can hear me, wave your hand. If you can't, all right, good. So I met Tom in 7th grade. We immediately bonded, became fast friends, and through high school, we did a whole lot of stuff together. Lots of role-playing games, lots of wrestling, football, full contact basketball in his front yard and in his driveway. Lots of classes together, lots of studying, study buddies. He brought me into debate. We were debate partners our senior year. And so by the end of high school, I had spent more time with Tom Spurgeon than anybody outside my family. And he was my best friend. And we stayed close through college. And the years after that, he was in my wedding, one of my groomsmen. And so there's a lot I would love to tell you. Tons and tons of stories. Lots of stories. And I can't tell them all right now. So I'm just going to have a couple. But come see me afterwards. Come see all these Muncie people if you want to learn what Tom was like when he was growing up. The stories. Tom loved a story. I came to understand how much Tom appreciated stories through role-playing games. If I played with Tom, he was the game master, the center of the universe. He was always the game master because he was the best at it, hands down, no doubt, ever. He was good for a lot of reasons, but most importantly, it's because he understood story. Every time we played, he could craft this game with all these disparate teenagers such that there was plot, there was character development, there was tension, there was a climactic end. I don't know how he did it because he was riffing this. He was doing it all off the cuff. But what he taught me explicitly in our conversations about gaming and implicitly through the way we played was that good role-playing gaming is group storytelling. It's a bunch of friends coming together, having fun, creating a story. And doesn't that sound like the Tom all the way through adulthood? He loved the story. He loved creation of the art that told the story, and he wanted to share it with community. I want to give an anecdote about football. We're really talking about football, but it is football. Tom and I played together, and I figured no one else here is probably going to have a story about football. So it's our senior year. Even though this takes place with football, it's really about Tom being more of a showman and kind of street smart and a little sneaky. So senior year, he's the left tackle offensively. Things haven't gone too well the last couple plays, and he comes back to the huddle frustrated that one of the defensive linemen is doing something which he clearly thinks is illegal, and he's not getting flagged. How does Tom solve this problem? Well, he steps back from the huddle, a couple giant steps, And he starts telling us, the team, what this defender is doing, how terribly ludicrous it is, huge gyrations, raised voice, talking about kung fu motion and all this, directing all his frustration at the huddle, never at the referee standing behind him. But he knew the referee heard every single word. And you can probably understand how the story is going to end up. You can predict it. The very next play, out comes the yellow flag. That defender was penalized for exactly what Tom was complaining about. And I don't think the referee ever knew that he'd been worked.
Yeah.
So I said, Tom and I spent a lot of time doing a lot of activities together. But of course, so many of our memories are just hanging out, just having fun together. And quintessential picture in my mind, we're upstairs in Tom's bedroom. And a lot of you can probably relate to this. There's several of us there. Somebody's over in the corner with the stereo, changing the record, maybe trying to find something new that the rest of us haven't experienced yet. Then over on the floor here, closer to the door, someone's lounging, flipping through an issue of Cerebus. And then 2 or 3 of us are sitting kind of in the love seat couch corner talking. It might be about a really serious matter. It might be frivolous. But it didn't really matter because we were together having fun. You know, high school can be tough for a lot of people, right? A lot of angst, some sadness. We had some tragedy in our high school. But my memories of Tom and being with him and with friends are filled with warmth and happiness and laughter because he was incredibly funny. I'm not real good. In fact, I'm terrible at keeping up with people once we no longer live together, once we're physically separated. Thank God for Mike Ashman, I wouldn't know who any of my friends were. It's a tribute to Tom that for years after we both moved out of Muncie, we stayed close. He and I stayed closer than any other of my Muncie friends and I. But even though that was true, eventually, as my family started to grow and my work got busy and his work got more busy, we talked less and less and less. And years could go by without us communicating directly. But when we did get together, it was just like old times. He and I could connect immediately and have fun and feel that warmth and that friendship immediately. And I always felt like Tom cared about me. When Tom and I got together, I knew that he cared about me as an individual. And I know that a lot of you out here have felt the same thing. He cared about people. He cared about you personally for who you were. And I always assumed, and this was a foolish assumption, that even if years went by without talking, we would get back together, we would talk again, we'd have that chance to have that close friendship. And it was particularly foolish for me because Tom and I, and all of us from Muncie Northside, experienced a tragedy the fall of our junior year when our friend Ethan Dixon was murdered. And it affected a lot of us different ways. One thing Tom did was write a song, or at least lyrics to a song. And he wanted us to make it into a song, so we started working the music side, but we never finished. And I put the lyrics away. Fate led me to these about 2 weeks ago. I wasn't looking for them. They just ended up in my hand when I was doing something else. I had no idea. So Tom would be appalled because what I'm going to do is read some of his words written when he was 16, maybe 17 years old. But Tom, I don't care. Because I can think of no better way of finishing than with your words. Goodbye, my friend. It really would have been quite nice to see you one more time again. We could have talked a while, maybe laughed, or maybe we just smiled like the good old days that we wasted away. I never thought I'd have to say goodbye to you so soon, and I never thought I'd live to see you die. You know, my friend, that I've been told that the adult world is harsh and cold. I don't care what people say. There is too much night before we reach the day. There was so much, too much left to say.
Dan Wright.
Hi, everyone. I was sitting on my front porch with Tom. It was summertime. It was evening. There might have been a couple of other people with us. This was 1990, I don't know, whenever. It was evening. We'd been drinking. I'm not sure we were in the most legal state of mind. It was beautiful out, and it was quiet. As we sat in the rocking chairs, and Tom broke the silence and said, "Children can be so cruel sometimes." There was this girl in school, and we chased her around the playground, and we said, "You're Chewbacca, you're Chewbacca." And she told on us, too. She ran up to the teacher, and she went, "Arr, arr, arr." He was so hilariously funny. I'm just going to drop those. I was 10 years old when I met, or Tom was 10 when I met him. I was 13. I'm 53 now. I had 40 years of real estate with my friend of a lifetime, Tom Spurgeon. This particular photo is Mr. Jeff Pitzer on the end. That's me in the middle. By the way, Jeff's with us here this evening, and to whom I owe a thank you for this very photograph. Tom has to be somewhere around 12 here. Around this time, the Spurgeon family took me to Chicago for a 3-day trip to celebrate Tom and Whit's birthdays. We took the Amtrak from Muncie to Chicago. We mooned cars in the intersection on the way up. I'm sorry, Mrs. Spurgeon, that we did that, but we sure did that. We stayed in a suite at the Palmer House, and we ate at Ron of Japan. I ate escargot for the very first time. And we shopped at the Water Tower. 12-year-old Tom bought a basic D&D set. We rolled up characters that weekend. It was never any question who was going to be the DM of all of the games that we ever played or the stories that we told ourselves. Tom was always going to be, that person. And just like Rob said, I have 10,000 stories you are not going to hear this evening. This is Arafast Weird and the Quadraphonic Mutants. Yeah. We spent hundreds of hours making up stories with these and so many other characters. Tom was always a genius to me. Always. Through all of our lives. My wife was quick to remind me, and so I want to make sure that I honor her in this, because she was right to remind me. Hang on, I've written this out longhand 8 times now, but I'm only doing this one area. There are a lot of people who are going to talk about Tom's genius because, man, he was. But the rarity in Tom was not just that he was the genius that he was intellectually, it's that he had a heart to match. As big as Tom's head was, Tom's heart was that big. That's a rare thing in a person. I've never met his like in any other person. He was obnoxiously generous with his kindness. He was one of the most integrous people I've ever known. He was deeply loyal. Now that's enough of my wife's stuff, as she said, to make sure that I said. He had such a heart. The 4th slide, let's just move on. Again, thank you to Jeff Pitzer for this photograph. This is a group shot. Here Tom is 12 or 13 years old, and he's surrounded by all of these high school kids. I'm a sophomore here, which means Tom has to be in the 8th grade. He's hanging out with high school kids. Tom was always beyond any sort of categorization based on age. He was always mature for his age, regardless of what age he was. Tom always seemed to me like an ancient child. Speaking of which, for those of you who, Tom, spent time with your children, wasn't Tom marvelous with your children? When my youngest daughter was about 3 years old, I remember Tom took her for a walk down to the local convenience store, and to watch Tom Spurgeon walk with my 3-year-old daughter or so down to the village pantry to buy penny candy. If you were from off-world, you'd never believe they were from the same species. Like, look at that. Those were both human beings. Wowee. Who'd have guessed? He was so charming with the children. Even as a man, connection to childlike glee was never very far away for Tom. We stayed children through our 40 years of friendship, even as we became men and did the things that men do. Laughter and being children was always there. I don't know how many of you did illegal things with Tom. I don't know how many illegal things you did. The last time he visited me in Muncie, we cut through, this is not my notes, we cut through the cemetery and took the train trestle across. You're not supposed to do this. It's illegal. We cut across the river on the train trestle so that we could go to Bob's Comic Castle, and that's the one in town that smells like pee really bad. But we walked in there, for goodness sake, so that Tom could drop $20 in that guy's cash register and buy some comics. It was important to Tom to support all of the comics people, all of them. And we broke the law by walking across that bridge. I won't give you the full listing of the things that we did that broke the law. Yes, no, you're welcome. Books, art, ideas, shows, plays, history, so many of these things that have shaped me. I've been shaped by these things because of my friendship with these very men, Whit and Tom. I was Whit's friend first, but because Tom and Whit were so close, being friends with Whit was to immediately be friends with Tom. The contributions into my life that Tom made are countless. And I knew from early, Tom understood the structure of ideas and how things functioned in a surprising way. And I don't want this to sound trite, but Tom understood lines. I know there's a comics easy thing to see there, but that's not what I mean. That's an easy thing to see. Tom understood the mailing system from elementary school. Tom understood dropping this in the mail and that goes there. Tom understood the public transportation lines in any city. He understood the train schedules in a family that understood these things, but Tom was adept at them. He sent me a copy of the New York Public Library desk reference once. I still have it. The other thing I'll tell you about this very picture, I remember one time at a Pizza King, an old lady walked up to Tom, this was after a play or something like that, and said to Tom, "Did you come from heaven?" And Tom looked down at her and said, "I don't think so. Why?" And she said, "Your eyes, your eyes." And that's all she said. She walked away. There doesn't have to be a punchline to these stories. This is March 9th of 1985. Tom is 15 years old here. He is the best man for my first marriage. That's right. I will leave for the Army within a year for this. Ethan Dixon will be shot and killed this year. Tom and I spent that very morning at the comic book shop in Indianapolis, Broad Ripple. That was that very trip where I bought my own copy of Bridgman's Complete Guide to Drawing from Life. We came home. I dropped Tom off. Tom phoned me to say Ethan Dixon had been shot and killed. And I know how quick Tom was to laugh. And for those of you who knew Tom closely, Tom was also very well acquainted with grief. And the grief of losing Ethan was always with Tom. Let's see. Let's keep going. I'm going to fast forward here from this photo about 12 years into the future. When I was 30 years old, I had a phone call with Tom. I won't tell you where I was. Doesn't matter. I was at my house, and I was doing graphic design and illustration and things like that. Because I grew up wanting to draw professionally. I didn't know what that meant. I wasn't really a comics person per se. I might have been happy mechanical drafting until I did that. But regardless, imagine wanting to draw professionally and having Whit and Tom as your friends. Wow. I got a dump of some pretty amazing people into my life. Well, I was 30 years old. I told Tom, the place where I'm working now, I think I've got a Corvette engine. They're keeping me in the garage. I think I'd like to do something bigger. And Tom suggested, he said, listen, you might think about syndicated cartooning. I think you could do it. But he was blunt. He said, but you're going to have to learn how to write. Like, oh, thanks for saying that. Well, he wasn't wrong. I think you could do it, he said. He was very encouraging about this. So within 3 years, that phone conversation was the other direction. I called Tom to ask if he would consider writing the strip with me. I was already discussing jokes and character psychology and cast structure on a regular basis with Tom, and I knew that the work would be stronger with his regular involvement. I love the line here that Tom Spurgeon writes for Bobo's Progress. He was born in Indiana, educated in Virginia, Illinois, and currently resides in Seattle, Washington. He has worked in comics since 1994. He has never been married, and his mother is not amused. Tom wrote that of himself. I love that Tom wrote that of himself. Yeah. Back cover. Tom visited a lot through our adult life. Tom was at my house writing with me the morning of 9/11. I learned an awful lot from him, especially mechanisms and structures for telling jokes. 2 of those I want to pass along to you here this evening. Not yet, but soon. I remember Tom read the Lord of the Rings trilogy in the 4th grade over a long weekend at the lake house. I read them in high school and had to ask him questions about them. Okay? Tom said all the guys that we gamed with, they all either wanted to write like Tolkien or draw like the brothers Hildebrand. All of them. He said it was one of the great things about fantasy gaming and role-playing games in general, that it seemed to bring people's creative sides right to the front. And I love that Tom was thinking that way. Even as a young person, Tom was thinking that way. It was an ongoing connection for us, the discussion of comedy and story structure and performance. And as always, Tom's encyclopedic recall of comics history. He sent me so many books of comics history. I wanted to be syndicated as a younger person. During that 3 years, it's not my notes either. And I heard C.F. Payne, the illustrator, who has done Time magazine covers, Sports Illustrated covers, give a talk in Indianapolis about all of the illustrators he knew that had reached the top of the profession, knew the history of painting inside and out, and could distinguish between Hans Holbein the younger and Hans Holbein the greater in the brushstroke. Well, this surprised me greatly. I was like, I want to be syndicated, and I don't know the history of American newspaper strip cartooning. And I said this to Tom on the phone. Well, he was the managing editor at the Comics Journal at that time. So every week in the mail, I'd get this package of, here's Elsie Segar's Popeye, here's Walt Kelly's Pogo, here's, and on down. Every room in my house has some kind of memorabilia that Tom sent me. Every single room. But the education that Tom provided here for me was just stunning. Just stunning. Before I tell you about the comedy things, I put this slide in. This is the inside of one of those packets. I put this slide in as a reminder to tell how much music Tom shared with me through the years. Tom was so wide-ranging, not only in his reading, but also in his music. By the way, Tom's very favorite T-Rex song was Metal Guru. I don't know what you're going to do with that, but there it is. We were at the lake house when I watercolored this and inked this, and I remember that was the very weekend that Tom shared with me the work of Ted Hawkins for the very first time. And there's a song that the very first song Tom played for me was a song called Sorry You're Sick. And if you've never heard the song, the man's woman is very ill, and he is solving her problem by going to the liquor store. My children learned to sing this song when they were about 6 or 7 years old. God bless Tom Spurgeon. Yeah. It's part of the reason why I have a second wife now. That's not true. But it's funny. All right. Comedy principle number 1 that I want to tell you about, that I learned from Tom. The exploitation of someone else's personal weakness for financial gain. I learned to think this way and to look for these things from Tom. Tom understood mechanisms of humor. When we were making up the cartoon strip, this was 2 characters. These were cost-you-a-dollar jokes. The insecure penguin, Stu, is paying for advice from a quick-witted, albeit opportunistic rabbit. And always charging this weak person money. It was always a note of humor. Tom was trying to write one of these every other week for a while, but we laughed like idiots over this again and again. And I still write jokes for a living and make stuff up. And a lot of the things that I learned from Tom, I still use in my everyday rambling and thinking and writing. So, exploitation of someone else's personal weakness. I can't stress that enough. Now, before I tell you the other one, I need to set this up for you. This is Shelton. While Tom and I were making things, we were also blowing off steam and goofing off a lot. This is a ballpoint pen comic that Tom and I did. I was attempting initially to write things that would mess Tom, to put sequential narratives together that wouldn't be easy to write. And the worst that I had at the moment, sitting at the dining room table, was a crippled kid walking around with a chicken. I thought it was funny. It's okay to me if you don't think that's funny. Regardless, we made several of these, and I remember Tom said, Dan, ballpoint pen may be your true medium. There was, going around at this time, Scott McCloud's 24-hour comic challenge. It was popular. 22 pages in 24 hours. Can you do that? Tom says, oh my God, that's a lot of work. How about we do a 2.4-hour comic? What can we get done in 2.4 hours? Like, well, maybe 8 pages. Maybe we can get 8 pages done. So, crippled kid and a chicken. Tom named them Shelton and Tevye. Tom was always really, really good at perfectly funny names. Now, the setup here is, for Shelton number 3, we actually did a 22-pager. And stayed up and drank and kept reading. The crippled kid has fallen through the ceiling and is on the floor, perhaps dead. The chicken is going to go do whatever the chicken is going to go do. And I've drawn several panels of the chicken walking along. I remember Tom sitting there next to me as I'm like, what is Tom going to write for this internal dialogue of this chicken while his best friend is laying there, maybe dead, on the floor? And Tom turns to me and says, what are the lyrics to Girl from Ipanema? Like, I don't know. At that time, I didn't know. I know now, and I almost brought my guitar and set it on the stage just to freak everybody out because, oh my God, he's not going to play guitar. Anyway, we went with something else. We went to this Try to Remember That Time in September when you were young and oh so mellow. But in Tom's mind, the idea of glacial calm instead of panicked crisis while your friend is laying there on the floor. Tom's place of glacial calm in that moment for the chicken was the Girl from Ipanema. And I'm not quite dining out on that story anymore, but it still amuses me. This hangs in my kitchen. Tom has a framed one of these somewhere in his, or he doesn't anymore, I don't know. Tom always came to my house after CXC. He was due at my house the morning after Whit called me to tell me that he had passed. Tom came after CXC to decompress. We had been friends for years and years, to talk about what was successful and what wasn't successful and what it was like to work with all of you who are involved in CXC. And I will always be grateful to CXC that it moved Tom closer. We visited an awful lot. I mean, we talked on the phone anyway, but once Tom was here in Columbus, we saw Tom at our house a few times a year, and we came here. As I said, there are little reminders of Tom in every single room of my house. Every room. I went through to verify that. Tom was constantly sending me things, and we were involved in making up stuff that it just shows up in every room. I think that Tom was still using a little image of Stu as his Twitter button. Tom liked writing for that character. We spent a lot of time talking through the things that were wrong with that character. Tom Spurgeon was a friend for a lifetime for me. I don't know the man that I would be if I didn't have Tom's friendship, his counsel, his influence, his kindness. Tom was a source of life to me. In closing, I would like to say what an honor it was to have known him and to have been friends with Tom, to have loved him and to have been loved by him. And my world is dimmer now because he's not here. And bless you all in your grief. And I'm glad that we're all here to say a public goodbye to Tom and remember him. Thank you all. Thank you.
Fred Herring.
Thanks. My name is Fred Herring. I live here in Columbus, Ohio. I know absolutely nothing about comics. And Tom Spurgeon was one of my best friends here, and I loved him so much. I totally respect the art form of comics. It was never an interest of mine, I'm going to be honest. I just talked to Jeff over here, and I didn't know what bone was. I apologize. Even though my company did a documentary on it, I had no idea what they were talking about. When Tom told me a few years ago, hey, I'm want to get lunch, which we did regularly, I can't make it because I'm finishing up this book on Fantagraphics. I'm like, what? You're writing a book on soda pop? Spurgeon. Like Fanta Orange? I have no idea what you're talking about. He goes, well, if it was soda pop, it'd probably have a few more readers. But I wouldn't have much to say on diet soda. Sadly, I had to Google Fantagraphics after that conversation, figure out what the hell we were talking about. My story with Tom is different, I think, than the old friends and comic and the family that we've heard so far. I met Tom in 1989 when I enrolled at Washington and Lee. And we joined the same fraternity. He was a junior. I was a freshman. And frankly, it's comic that I'm up here because we weren't really that close for those 2 years. The Tom I knew in college was different than the Tom I got reacquainted with when he moved to Columbus a few years ago. When we were in college together, Tom, frankly, was a bit intimidating to me. He was a campus celebrity. You may or may not know this, but he was class president at a relatively prestigious college, and he was a campus opinion leader. He also struck me as driven and bound for high-level success. It was clear to me then, as I'm sure it is to all of you, he had a genius-level intellect, that razor-sharp wit, and a mastery of the English language. Tom Spurgeon reminded me of Winston Churchill. One time, the president of the fraternity president of the college made some rules against fraternities that people thought were a bit strict. So we had an all-campus meeting. It was only 1,600 students at the school, so you could do that. And I remember Tom stood up from the back row when the president of the university opened it up to questions and said, "Sir, I think your rules are broad and improper." And everybody stood up and clapped. I was like, damn, Spurgeon just took down the president. It was pretty cool. So then he graduated, and I assumed he was going to go on to law school and would end up being attorney general or secretary of state or something someday with that kind of wit and intellect. But to be honest, I didn't think much about Tom after he graduated in 1991. I had 2 years left, and at the time, there was no social media. We were friends, but not especially close, except for two gifts that he gave me when I was in college that really helped me remember him. The first is that Spurge gave us one of the greatest college Animal House-esque stories of all time. Sorry, Tommy, I got to do it. Most of you know him as the benevolent, kind Papa Bear of the comics world, but Tom had an irreverent, wild side that I was privileged enough to see firsthand. In college, Spurge, like most of us, liked to drink every once in a while. He wasn't an everyday drinker, but when he drank, he drank. One night, while we were all drinking at the fraternity house, someone ordered a pizza from Domino's. When the driver came to deliver the pizza, Spurge decided it was time for him to leave, even though he was in no shape to drive. I apologize, Miss Spurgeon. So he walked out in the fraternity parking lot, jumped into the idling Domino's delivery car, complete with lighted triangle domino sign on the roof, and took off down the street. As you can imagine, the delivery guy came out to find the car had been stolen and called the police. But alas, Spurge didn't get too far as he was picked up by the Lexington, Virginia police about a mile into his journey. We picked him up. Some of us sobered up and picked him up in the jail. I talked to him. He was, "These charges are bullshit." I go, "Dude, you stole the Domino's car, man. Like, well, I thought it was my car." I'm like, "You have a lighted Domino's thing on?" "Well, I like Domino's pizza." My man. I'm sure he's ticked at that story. Being that he was a campus celebrity, the shenanigans landed him on the front page of school paper the next day. At a small school, everybody knew about it, but fortunately the Domino's manager realized it was harmless college stupidity and dropped the changes. I'm sure Tom is pissed at me right now for sharing that story. I actually wrote that, but it's just too much of a classic for me not to mention. But second, and more importantly, the second gift he gave me when I knew him in college is I had a few conversations with Tom about faith. We were both interested in Christianity at the time, though not really practicing on any level. We were searchers, I guess you could say. I remember a few deep discussions we had about faith, his sincere thoughts on the veracity of Jesus' claims, and his interest in the concept of grace. But that honestly was about the extent of our friendship with him at the time. And that was 25 years ago. And I think we had both kind of forgotten about each other as we were peripheral friends. A few years ago, I learned from social media that he moved here. I reached out to him on Facebook. It said, "Remember me? Want to grab a beer and catch up on the last 25 years? Smiling face emoji. He responded that he remembered me and he'd like to get together, but he wanted to make sure that I knew that he didn't drink like he did in college. I laughed and said, "Neither do I. Let's hang out, brother." What developed from there was an unexpected gift for me. I didn't plan on this, but our reconnection grew into a sincere friendship. We'd get together semi-regularly and talk about the old times, what happened to people, swap old college stories, and talk about our families and jobs. He told me about his job at the Comics Reporter and his position at the CXC, and I kind of think, he never said this, but I kind of think he liked getting there with me because I knew nothing of his world and he knew nothing of mine. And I think it was refreshing to him to talk about other things. We talked about all kinds of stuff, politics, religion. A while later, I went to a few of the CXC events with him to support him. I remember one time he sent me a text. He goes, "I just need 4 warm bodies there tonight. I don't care if they're into comics." That was the first year of the CXC. So I showed up with some buddies. After reading a few of his articles and attending events with him, something became obvious to me that I shared with him. I said, "Spurge, I'm getting the picture that you're like a big deal in this world. You seem like the benevolent Jerry Garcia of this movement that everyone looks up to and respects." He, of course, brushed it off and said, "I'm no big deal." However, he said he felt fulfilled in his role within the comics world. And this was what was poignant to me, not so much because of the art form, but because of the people that were devoted to the art form. In fact, he once told me comics wasn't his favorite art form, it was theater. But he was drawn to this world because of the people. And he spoke so highly and so fondly of many of you. A lot of you, I didn't even know who he was talking about, but he would speak so highly of the people that he met. And I realized pretty quickly that this was his family outside of his brothers and his parents. And in some strange way, for me, it became obvious that this was his calling. We spent several times over the past few years being vulnerable about our insecurities, failures, and missed opportunities. This was not the driven, ambitious, intimidating Tom Spurgeon I knew in college. It seemed like the relationships and his role as chief encourager satisfied Spurge more than the subcultural fame or respect he garnered from it. Inevitably, we talked a lot about our faith journeys since college. I told him I had come to eventually put my faith in Jesus, not so much the religion, but the actual person of Jesus Christ. He said he still had some doubts, as do I, but he had a similar faith. He showed up to a few Bible studies that I led later and even asked some insightful questions and sent me a text one time saying, I really appreciate what you had to say tonight, but that's not been my interpretation of that passage. Can we get together and talk about it? Those of you that think he had an encyclopedic knowledge of comics, he knew the Bible front and back. When I learned he died, I was shocked and shed some tears. But as the tributes and remembrances started to roll in, I realized something poignant about Tom's life that I hope to emulate. Tom lived a missional life, devoted to a rare mission. His mission wasn't to amass wealth, generate fame or power for himself, which he could have done with his mighty intellect. His mission was to help people, many of whom didn't even deserve it in the eyes of our culture. He often told me the favorite part of his job was to find and elevate artists that were devoted to their craft but weren't getting the attention they deserved. He took joy in believing in people when, frankly, I'm not even sure they believed in themselves. He wanted them all to know how valuable they were and how much he appreciated the inordinate amount of time and angst it took to stare at a blank piece of paper and come up with a picture and words that moved people. He was so respectful of that. And to close, there was an article written entitled, it was written by Benjamin Birdie, and it said, What Tom Spurgeon Built. And I sent this to one of Tom's college classmates who I kept in touch with, but Tom has not. And I said, yeah, Spurge died. And I said, here's one article about he was a big deal in this comics world. And this guy is an entertainment lawyer with an MBA. Kind of a big deal. He used to run a successful advertising agency. It got bought out for hundreds of millions of dollars. And he called me, which was strange, and he said the article had him crying. And it rattled him to the core. Because he realized that much of his life had been spent on himself. He'd gotten to the top, and he realized there was nothing there. Though he hadn't seen Spurge since college, he said he was now inspired to make an impact in the lives of others, like Spurge did. I found this to be profound and just the start of Tom's legacy, which I believe all of you will carry on. Whether you believe in the Jesus story or not, the supposition in the Bible is that Jesus gave his life up for those who didn't deserve it. The definition of grace. While Tom rarely talked about his mission in biblical terms, he lived his life that same way. He used his gifts for others, not for himself. He laid his life down for all of you, for us, for me, and for his example and role in my life, I'm most grateful. I wanted to, if you'll indulge me here for a second, because I think Spurge would want this based on a lot of our discussions. If you're comfortable with it, I'd like to say a small prayer. Whether you believe or not, that's fine. This is something Tom and I shared. I think it'd be appropriate to do that right now. Lord, I thank you for putting Tom in my life, in all of our lives. I thank you for the example that he set for me of someone who jettisoned all the things our culture wants us to go for and really found his spot in helping others in something that I knew nothing about before he moved here. And I do thank you, Lord, for the gift that you gave me of reconnecting with him after 25 years. I never thought he'd be in my life 10, 15 years ago in such an impactful way. And I thank you for putting this together, and I thank you for the impact that he had on everybody's world. And I believe he's up there with you, and you've told him, well done, good and faithful servant. Amen.
Eric Reynolds.
I've already written a few thousand words about Tom, and I didn't feel that I wanted to just, read from what I've already written and rehash some of that where I feel like I've unpacked our relationship. And I also wasn't sure I'd be able to get through it if I tried. Tom, so I wanted to just say a few brief words. Tom has been one of my best friends for over half my life. We met at we were in our early 20s. We were handed over the keys to a magazine at a very exciting time in the comic book field. And we're entrusted with this mission to carry on a theme that was incredibly invigorating for us in a way that has completely defined our lives. We both knew almost from that time that we were both going to be in comics for at least as long as we could figure out how to make it work. And I bring that up because it was a remarkably invigorating community that, as I say, it really set us on the path for the past 25 years. This was in the early 90s when we were both in our early 20s. And one of the reasons I wanted to make sure I was here this weekend was both to honor Tom, but also to honor the city of Columbus, because we existed at this exciting time that I feel like in a lot of ways we constantly look back on. In some ways we were maybe trying to chase that feeling. And in Tom's case, it was here. And I wanted to be here not only to honor Tom, but to thank all of you in Columbus for welcoming me here and giving him a place to be himself, to do what he wanted to do, to help people, to be a part of a community. Everything that I've heard here tonight is Tom. He didn't care about money. He wasn't careerist in the least. Yet he had a career because of that grace and generosity of spirit. And I'm as sad as I am to lose Tom at the age of 50, I also legitimately believe that Columbus gave him a lease on life, and that we might have lost him even sooner. So I am so thankful to Jeff and to everybody, to Caitlin, to everybody that brought him here, took him in, and let him be a part of your lives. And that's really all I wanted to say. He was a great friend. He was an incredibly loyal friend. He was the funniest guy I knew. And I'm just, I'm going to miss him a lot, and I'm just grateful that he was in my life for as long as he was. Thank you.
Jordan.
Hi. So my name is Jordan Raphael. I thought I was the most unique individual in Tom's life, but I think it's that guy right there, right? So I guess I'm not going to make that claim anymore. And also, I apologize for this whole thing. I mean, I don't know what I was thinking. I actually flew in from LA with my wife and our son, and I don't think I was prepared, and for the whole thing, and that's reflected in my attire. So anyway, so I knew Tom for 25 years or so, pretty much my whole adult life, and I think, as we've seen, what was really fascinating and remarkable about him is that he had such a diverse range of interests. He was smart about so many things that everyone really they had their own journey with him in their life. And this panel kind of captures mine. So this is I think it's 23, 24 years old. It's from a comic that Tom wrote, and it was drawn by Greg Stump, who is a cartoonist at the at Fantagraphics and the Comics Journal. And it was for a short comic that they contributed to an anthology that I published back when I was in college. And as you can see, so it's probably, I'm the person on the right. And I guess, I was always kind of the Gilligan to Tom Skipper is how people sort of described it back then, and then sort of throughout the whole time that I knew him. I was always slightly annoying, asking question after question. My wife said, "Oh, this is still you. This is who you are," which Tom answered mostly very patiently. I was always learning from Tom, always trying to impress him. Even now, like standing here today, I'm wondering, what does he think about what I'm saying? Like this thing. So I was really lucky to share so many different experiences with him. Over the years, I was his roommate. I was his intern at the Comics Journal. I was an editor. I co-wrote this book with him back in the day. I honestly not even sure what we did on the Comics Reporter, because I've seen like 14 different descriptions of whatever I was doing. I know what he was doing, but what I was doing was basically, anyway. So I was involved with him in the Comics Reporter, and then of course, I was his friend for all that time. So he made my life richer, and it was way more interesting just by the fact that he was in it. And actually, one thing that I've really appreciated about the many tributes to Tom that people have written since he died, which I thought was very appropriate for who he was, is that they acknowledged not only the good about him, and there was a lot that was really, really good about him, but it was also they also acknowledged his struggles. In his life, there were certain things that he struggled with, and I think he would have appreciated. And for anyone who hasn't seen it, the Comics Journal has a long page of tributes to him, and I think he would have appreciated that as well, because it's very authentic to who he was, and it very accurately described him. And he was very no nonsense. He didn't really like it if you tried to sugarcoat anything, and I think he would have appreciated that with his struggles. So I guess I'll just talk for a moment about the two things that I noted with him, with his struggles. So one, obviously, for those who knew him, there was always the struggle with his weight and with food. I thought throughout all the time that I knew him, I would talk to him about it. I talked about all the options, all the things that you could do for a friend who's struggling with an issue like that. In the end, it was his own struggle, and all you could really do is be there for him. And then the other thing that he struggled with throughout his life was really this issue he had with at times being productive or finishing some of the work that he did. And as I was thinking more about it, I think really what that was, it was really the price that he paid for his enormous talent as a writer and as an editor, but really as a writer. He made writing look easy, I guess, like a Peanuts cartoon, right? But it really wasn't easy for him. It took some coaxing, for example, when we wrote our book together, to get him to, finish the stuff that he was responsible for as we were working out. But, once he did them, what he did was really terrific. And it would have been sort of just a boring old life story if I didn't have Tom with me on that book, and the insightful criticism and the analysis and all the appreciation that he did and that he contributed to take that book to another level. And the other thing that I've also recently realized is I always thought the Comics Reporter was really perfect for him. I thought it was the perfect vehicle for his writing, and for his thinking. It was a place where he could write things quickly and just whip out a lot of amazing content very quickly and consistently. And it was also varied, because I think at times you would get bored if you had to write the same thing for focus on the same project for a long time. And so it gave him an opportunity to do a lot of different things. And that kept him very interested and engaged and productive. And I thought he had at least 10 really, really excellent years doing the Comics Reporter. And it was really gratifying to see him have that experience in his life. And it's also been really gratifying to see over the last few weeks how much the Comics Reporter was a part of his identity. I mean, it was referenced in his New York Times obituary. I mean, if you can imagine an obituary in the New York Times talking about a comics blog that someone had, been operating for 10 years. I mean, he ran it for longer, but I thought he had really 10 very excellent years. I think we all know what I'm talking about. But anyway, sorry, buddy. I think you would probably agree, right? Does anyone think you would disagree? You would agree. Okay. But anyway, it's been really remarkable for me. I haven't been involved in comics for many years, probably since this came out. For anyone who cares, I'm a lawyer now. So, I do other things. And seeing all the articles and everything that's been written about him, it's been really amazing to see how much the Comics Reporter was a part of his identity, how many people whose lives he was able to touch as a result. So the last thing I was going to just point out is a lot of people have mentioned, Tom was just incredibly upbeat. He's very, very funny. You could see him every 6 months and just pick up the conversation exactly where you left off. Sometimes he would have some low moments, and in those low moments, he would always worry about his life and his work and, whether any of it mattered and if anyone would care or remember him when he was gone. And I think he'd be really glad to see everyone here tonight, and then also the hundreds and maybe even thousands of people who, wrote about him on social media and online, and just that at the end, so many people do obviously and deeply cared about him. And at the end of the day, that his life meant so much to many people. I think he would really appreciate that. So thank you. It's great to see everybody.
Gil Roth.
You'd want us to post that on the Comics Reporter. I'm Gil Roth. Tom was the closest friend I had, and I knew him almost half my life. I want to get something across first. I need your forbearance here. As far as emotion goes, I tend to express annoyance more than anything else, so this might lead to a bit more weepiness and emotion, so please bear with me. I don't know who I'd be without Tom in my life, and I don't know how I've gotten past through the past month without him. The bulk of our relationship was by email. We maybe saw each other in person 40 or 50 times over 23, 24 years. There are thousands and thousands of emails, though, and everything is saved in the Gmail cloud up there, so they can find out everything we thought about each other and things we may have said to other people about each other, etc. But we would share everything and anything, and it was comics and basketball and theater and the economics of rail travel, which is seriously an issue he was concerned with, and the amount of Amtrak stuff I do by day, this mattered to him. So if I saw an article, I'd send him a PDF, we'd talk after, and just whatever else cropped up. And the thing about Tom was, he wasn't necessarily interested in everything you were interested in, but he was interested in why you were interested in it. He cared about, why you cared about something, what it meant to you, and how you approached it, and the rigor you brought to it. And it's what a lot of the speakers have talked about so far today, is the way he could think. And I think that's part of the conversation I had yesterday with someone about his time at the seminary and the way it
It taught him to read in certain ways. And that reading of the world, not just comics, not just theater scripts, etc., that characterizes Tom as what makes him special. Now, a few nights ago when I was trying to write this, I had that moment where I thought, man, I should zap this to Tom. He could help me fix this. And so if it doesn't work, blame him for not being here. But I've had a lot of those moments, and I know a lot of you guys have echoed those sentiments. So many times something comes up and you think, oh, I need to tell Tom. I should text him. I should zap him. And he's not there. Now, we connected in the mid-'90s. I posted a couple of jokes on the message board for his old magazine, respectively about Moses Malone, the Claremont and Byrne run of the X-Men, and Tom Stoppard's Arcadia. And I realized now he must have thought this was a secret plot. Somebody was trying to get all of his pressure points one after another. So he found a kindred spirit in me. And we corresponded a bunch from there. He reached out afterwards, and we stayed in touch, and he had me write for the Journal, the Comics Journal, a few times. I did some reviews and some interviews. We got to meet in person about a year after our virtual meeting when he was visiting New York City. And over the next 20 years, in addition to those bazillion emails and infrequent phone calls, most of our in-person interactions were at comics festivals. He did come out to stay with us a few times in New Jersey, but otherwise it was Small Press Expo, SPX, Toronto Comic Arts Festival, TCAF, and a few other things like CAB and MoCA where we'd correspond, or we'd get to meet. I'd always talk to him during the day, but I figured he needed to work the room at these things. If you've ever been at a festival with Tom, you can't walk more than 10 feet because everybody is coming to talk to Tom because he was the center of this universe. And so what he would always do is make sure he and I had time to get together for dinner. Pretty much every event, except CXC, where he was incredibly overloaded and I never wanted to impose. We would always go out and get dinner at some point when we were at a show, usually a place that comics people didn't frequent because he sort of just wanted somewhere that wasn't comics. Just so we could chill out and not have to be in full work mode. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about meals with Tom. Nothing menu related. That's my wife's field. She knows the menus and food much better than I. This is more about the phenomenon. Now, for a few years at the Small Press Expo, SPX, in Bethesda, Maryland, he and I would hit this cheap Mexican place called Mi Rancho. As Jaime Hernandez is there. Jaime pointed out to us when we took him there one time that in English it actually means my rancho. That's what it stands for. So, thank you. The translation, all that. So, but yeah, early on it was just the two of us at the rancho. But in recent years, we brought cartoonists and other friends along. It was cheap. The entrees were enormous. They generally got Tom's order right. When they didn't, he would get that puzzled and bemused look on his face, that thing that was just this utterly charming, a little like that. It's charming look that was always a joy to see. On the way there one time, this is in terms of the oddball moments that happened, the two of us watched a younger cartoonist, Lisa Hannawalt, completely fail to recognize this legendary cartoonist, Peter Bagg, who was sitting beside her in the back seat of my car as we were all headed out to dinner. And Tom side-eyed me while Lisa was interrogating Pete about why he was at SPX and asking, so what's your deal, man? Just trying to find out. And Pete sort of had to say, I made this comic in the 90s. It was called Hate. And again, we're just side-eyeing each other. Where is this going to go? Is she going to blow up? Is he going to blow up? Lisa turned out to be the one who blew up. She screams and, oh my God, you're Pete Bagg, and then turned completely red. We were thankful it defused from there, and it was a great evening. But there were a lot of goofy little moments like that over the years. But the thing is, when we were at a table, when we were just sitting down and eating, that's when Tom could relax. He could let his metaphorical hair down. But yeah, it's always bald. But we could talk about life and family and the changes we were both seeing in our middle age. And yeah, we'd gossip about comics, or there'd be something on ESPN on the flat screen at the bar, and we would start a little sports rant, and we're just two friends shooting the breeze about whatever topic came to either one's mind. And it's the root of friendship, I found. Now, Mi Rancho closed down a few weeks after the 2018 edition of SPX, and this year we went somewhere else. And our cartoonist guest was Eddie Campbell. Those of you who are not comics people, Eddie is this Scottish-Australian cartoonist who did these wonderful autobiographical comics, as well as a whole series about Bacchus in the modern age. But his autobiographical, and both sides of his strips have always had this life wisdom aspect to them. And getting to know him in recent years, I've picked up a little of his wisdom, I think. But during the dinner, he talked about bucket lists and why he thought the whole concept of a bucket list was humbug, we'll say, because there are kids in the crowd, BS. That you can't take those experiences with you. When you jump out of a plane because you found out you've had a terminal diagnosis, when things are, you're going to do something absolutely crazy, go to the end of the world, none of that goes with you when you die. And what Eddie said was, if he was facing the end, he just want to walk his dog one more time and watch another sunset. And I think Tom and I both agreed with that. I don't remember too much of the dinner otherwise, but that's the thing that stuck out. It was about a few weeks before his death, middle of September. Now, Toronto Comic Arts Festival was very different than Bethesda and the Small Press Expo, because my wife comes along, and because Toronto has much better restaurants than Bethesda, Maryland, which is possibly why my wife comes along to TCAF. Now, it's May, and the TCAF, Toronto Comic Arts Festival, ends on Mother's Day, that Sunday. And we had this tradition where Amy and Tom and I would go out to this wonderful restaurant that we love, and because it's Mother's Day, there's always weird family dynamics at all the tables, and we would all make up stories about what we were seeing and why this person brought flowers, and clearly they're out of favor with that mother-in-law, and it's all sorts of stuff. We always have a wonderful time trying to remember what we ordered the previous year, and it's a heavy-duty Chinese place, more Cantonese language than English on the menu, so we'd always try and figure out what the hell we ordered and try and get the same thing, and it was always wonderful. Sometimes we'd bring somebody along, but generally it was just the three of us, and it was just a way when a show is over for us to just decompress and to just enjoy company and find food. And this past year, Rebecca joined us, and it was the happiest I've ever seen Tom. I mean, everybody who's talked so far has talked about the ups and downs in Tom's life and the joy he brought, but also, the darkness that he carried. And that looseness I was talking about when we're at the table and Tom's at ease, that's nothing. That was nothing compared to this past May, and just the ease that he had and that they had with each other, and the love that was growing between them. It was beautiful to see my friend experiencing that. And I'd trade a moment of that, again, for everything else. The last 23, 24 years, all the correspondence, all the intellectual thought, everything we shared, I'd trade it all just to see that look again. And I think Eddie's right about the bucket list thing. Most of that is BS. But I'm also glad Tom got to have that experience before he left us. I could go on about all sorts of Tom's stories, but I'll do that afterwards when we're shooting the breeze. I just want to thank all of you for coming and for all the support and love you've shown him over the years. Thank you.
Jeff Smith.
Thanks, Gil. That was very nice, and I'm going to cry. Tom came out to Columbus on a wing and a prayer. I didn't get very far, did I? Gil, you're a dick. And so are you, Eric. But we had a crazy idea for a weird kind of a show. Like many people up here, I met Tom about 25 years ago. I had just finished on an interview with Gary Groth for the Comics Journal, and I was actually pretty intimidated by Gary Groth in the Comics Journal. But Tom had just started work there as the managing editor. And his job was to follow up with me to proof the interview and, just make sure it was all right. And he put me at ease right away because he was a Muncie. He was a Midwestern boy, just like me. And we had a very similar sense of humor and a lot of shared sensibilities. And I always looked forward to running into him at comic book shows, because that's a weird thing about comics, is that there's these comic book conventions all over the country, and it's like this tribe that moves from one to the other, and we all see the same people, and it all culminates at the Comic-Con in San Diego. And that's about the same time I met Eric as well at these shows. Tom had this great ability, almost a superpower, to be at every comic book event that was going on. And didn't he? I mean, and I especially was aware of that once he came here to do CXC, because there's a lot of comics love in this town and a lot of events going on all throughout the year. And Tom went to every one of them. It was amazing. I remember in San Diego during the Comic-Con, Scholastic had a launch party for their graphics line, and they were starting it with Bone. And Tom came, and Scholastic could throw a party. For a kid's publisher, they had some booze, man. It was good. And Tom stayed for quite a while, and it was the very first time I really got to spend time with Tom and see him holding court with all these cartoonists. And some of them were well-known cartoonists, and some of them were, just young people starting out, but they were all spellbound by him. And I never forgot that. But it was really in 2011 when he got sick, real sick, that I got to know him even better. I actually called up Jordan and asked him for, what room number is he, where's his hospital, what's the room number? Because I know what you need when you're sick, right? Your mom buys you comic books, right? So I needed comic books. So I got his room number, and I went over to my comic book collection, which is not in boards and bags. It's just in big piles. And went through my old stuff, and I found some stuff I thought he might like Uncle Scrooge or Little Lulu, a Gold Key Cool Cat. Yeah, nobody remembers that one. I remember one of the comics was a 15-cent World's Finest. And it had Batman and Superman went back in time, and on the cover you can see, I think Superman was leading a bunch of Puritans in burning Batman at the stake. Or maybe it was the other way around, but it was an awesome comic. Anyway, he called me after he recovered, and he told me that he had been in a coma when my comics had arrived, but he really was touched that somebody was sending him comics. And after that, we were just a lot closer, and I would make an effort to see him at shows and vice versa. And it was only a couple of years later, in 2013, that I invited Tom to come to Columbus and stay in my studio for about a week so we could discuss some ideas I had for this kind of a weird show. Let me see here. The idea of the show, CXC, Cartoon Crossroads Columbus, was kind of based on some shows like TCAF and Luca in Europe and Canada that had different events in different venues around the city, so that you would be forced to go around the city, and the city would become a character in the show. And I loved that when I was in Luca or when I was at TCAF. And also in Columbus, we have this weird thing where we have all these this secret army of comics aficionados that know all about comics, and they're in decision-making places. There's at the Columbus Art Museum, they did a show where they got all of Robert Crumb's Genesis. Do you remember when Crumb did Genesis? And he did it straight. I mean, there was some dirty stuff in it, but it was really from the Bible. It was actually already there. They did, at the Columbus Museum of Art, they put all 300 pages of original art around 5 galleries. I couldn't believe it. And CCAD was having, like once a year, each one of these art institutes in Columbus, CCAD had like Marjan Satrapi in to talk to him. The Wexner had Dan Klaus. And of course, Billy Ireland had somebody great all the time. And so I asked Tom to come to Columbus and talk it over. The brain trust for CXC in this very early stage was Vijay Iyer, my wife and business partner, myself, and Lucy Caswell, the founding curator of the Billy. And we got together with Tom, and I don't know why I called Tom. I have no idea, but I do know that once he got here, our ideas and energy meshed very well. We kind of had like a 3-pronged idea philosophically. My external structure that I wanted to include the city and have all the different art institutions and colleges and museums around the city to be involved. And then we had a contribution like from Lucy, which was from her original version of CXC, which was called the Triennial Festival of Cartoon Art. And there, I was always amazed by this feeling of collegiality. Whether you had Sergio Aragones or Will Eisner, or a young woman, Colleen Doran, or me, who hadn't even gotten into comics yet, everybody was on this equal basis, and everybody was respectful, and everybody helped everybody else. It was very nice. I mean, you see Sergio sit in a chair with like people all around him, and he's just happily just drawing comics. It was that kind of collegiality. And the third and final leg of this stool was what Tom brought. And Tom wanted every cartoonist to be welcome and to feel good and to feel like Columbus and the CXC Festival was a second home to them. Someone else mentioned that earlier, and it's very true. So with this philosophy, this piece together, we talked Tom into coming out here. We didn't have much to pay him. It was a small stipend and some moving expenses. And he came out, and he and I rolled up our sleeves, and like Mutt and Jeff, or like Skipper and Gilligan, we went around to the Columbus Museum of Art. We went to the Downtown Library, to CCAD, the Columbus College of Art and Design, and of course Billy, and the Wexner Center for the Arts. And somehow everybody agreed to play with us. That was our big idea. You guys have brilliant international cartoonists come speak to your groups once a year. Let's just all do it on the same weekend. Wouldn't that be easy? It wasn't always easy. Things could go wrong. Tom was also a dick. But when things would get kind of tricky or hard, I mean, if things really do kind of go askew, your guests don't show up, or they want something ridiculous, or, you know, somebody got lost. I mean, at one time, somebody was driving Kate Beaton around and had a car accident while we were waiting for her to come to an event. That kind of crazy stuff, that's when I liked Tom. Because Tom had this cool thing he would do where he could say something and just take the piss out of it. Or even if he was making up some BS excuse about why he hadn't come up with an invoice or something. He had this way of almost like sideways sheepishly giving you this side eye and this smile. Like, kind of, you knew you were in the joke and that everything was going to be okay. I'll give you one example of a Tom thing. I'll give you two examples. And that was one. The second one is Tom's car. I would say, I had one of those moments somebody brought up where he had this like big like bronze Bronco thing. And just yesterday, I was walking down the street, and a big bronze Bronco turned into a driveway to turn around in front of me. And, I just had that moment where, Tom. And then the bad moment where you go, oh, yeah. But Tom's car was hilarious. Columbo would have thought that this car was ridiculous. And whenever you need a Tom, I need that list of guests that we came up with yesterday. What'd you do with that? Oh, it's on the floor of my car. I really need that receipt. It's on the floor of my car. It's like, Tom, there's like 1,000 receipts on the floor of your car. I'm never gonna, and that receipt never came back. And he'd be like, as the show grew, and last year was our 5th year, and I think it was probably the most successful year we had. Very much thanks to Tom and our new president, Rebecca Damson, and of course to everyone who works at CXC, just works so hard. This is so much work. I'm sorry. I had no idea. It is, but it is worth it. It's been worth it. And even when Tom drove me crazy, it was always worth it. The show was always so much better than it really needed to be. There was always more panels, better guests. He was our brain trust. He's going to be pretty tough to replace. But as the show grew, one of our yearly duties was to pose for a photo for one of the local papers or magazines. And a couple of them cycled by here. My favorite one was the one that went by, and I'm wearing like a blue Hawaiian shirt, and I'm like leaning up against the railing, and it was sorry about that. It was shot out here on the balcony overlooking the lobby. And one of the reasons I like that picture so much is because we're laughing, and it's real laughter. Because we do these pictures all the time, and this photographer is like trying to coach Tom to get closer, and I'm like practically leaning over the rail, and Tom goes, "Whenever we do these pictures, it always looks like I'm about to eat Jeff." And that's right when he clicked the picture, and we were just laughing about that. Well, Tom, wherever you are, when I get there, we'll start another show. And when Eric gets there, you can start another magazine, because I know the squares in heaven aren't hip to comics. But maybe we'll be in the other place, and comics will be all over the place anyway. So that'll be all right then.
Laurenn.
Hi. My name is Laurenn McCubbin, and I am an associate professor at Columbus College of Art and Design in the Comics and Narrative Practice program. There would not be a program without Tom Spurgeon. And Tom was very much my most unlikely friend, especially if you ever knew me 20 years ago, when my introduction to Tom was him being a dick about me in print. And we only became close after Tom moved to Columbus and emailed me and said, well, if we're going to live in the same city, we should probably talk. And we did, and I fell in love with that dude. He was a fierce and loyal and a wonderful friend who you could totally get on Messenger with at 3 a.m. and tell every single one of your weird thoughts and problems about comics or politics or people that you knew in common. He was always eager to hear the quote-unquote hot goss. And you could laugh about lots of things together. But when Tom told me, when we were telling each other our life stories, that he had gone to seminary school. I was just like, I don't see you as a preacher, Tom. But I realized that Tom was a pastor. And we were his weird heathen flock. And he knew every single one of us by name. Even if you didn't think he knew who you were, Tom knew you and knew what you were doing. When I was putting together the comics program, Tom said, "Oh, that's exactly what Columbus needs. And then the next thing we need is a publisher for all of those poor kids to work at when they get done." We're still working on that point, but the second year of the program, I put out an anthology with my students called Spitball, and I asked Tom to write the foreword, thinking, how bad could he blow this deadline? It's literally 1 page, dude. I had to hold up production. But only by 2 days. Because he wanted to read every single one of the students' comics. And I had asked for a page, and he gave me 3 pages of the most wonderful and insightful commentary about my students' work. Seeing things in them that even after 4 years of being with them, I had not seen. And he saw them. And he knew who they were, and he knew what they wanted to be. And he would constantly ask me about my kids. How is Alyssa doing in Portland? Has Alec made any comics yet? And he remembered them, and he knew them, and he always wanted them to do the next best thing. I will miss texting Tom at 3 a.m. I will miss the opportunities for my husband to talk to him about boxing when everyone else is talking about comics. I miss my friend. He was a very good pastor to us. Thank you.
Rebecca.
I don't know if I'm actually going to make it to any of my notes or be able to say much of anything. I'm Rebecca. I think it's been mentioned. This is MJ. They're mine. They're just coming up because without MJ, I would have had nothing to do with comics. MJ is my comics connection, and when they were in high school, might have had an experience where the license might have been taken away from them for a temporary period of time. So I would drive MJ around to all the different comics events, and through that got invited to be on the beginning of the CXC board because I had done work on our local public television and radio stations, and then had taken a break to do lots of momming. And the timing for me to get back into working in nonprofit happened to coincide with the beginning of CXC, for which I am forever grateful. I met Tom when board meetings started, and this is a sentiment I think many will understand. He was always super quiet until he started talking. And I was pretty convinced that he thought I was just some idiot suburban mom who had no place there, which was kind of true, except for I had some ideas to how nonprofits and arts things and things like that worked. So I just worked really hard, and they would say, hey, go do this table at Independence Day and promote CXC. And I would send a whole bunch of emails like, what exactly do you want me to do? And would never hear anything back. So I would just go do it I think Jeff would show up a couple of times to help me set up, and it would already be done. So it was kind of like, oh, they can do something. Well, maybe we'll give them a little bit more work. And, it ends up that when Jeff decided to step down as president, I was behind him, although I will probably never tell any of you that ever again and just let other people stand in the front because this is not my thing. I remember at one meeting, it was my 50th birthday, and this was almost exactly 4 years ago, and it was the first time that I ever thought Tom even recognized that I was in the room, because I happened to mention to Caitlin it was my 50th birthday, and all of a sudden his head snapped up, and he looked over, and he told me later that I had graduated from Midwestern Child Bride at that moment.
Did she be child mom?
Well, no, yet like I had you when I was like 9. But, hey, thank you, Mom, for good genes. Eventually, Tom and I really didn't get to know each other until 2016, when after he had been very ill and Whit was here, and we were working a table at Space to promote CXC, and I think Whit had been working really hard and had been around Tom pretty much 24/7 for a while, and so Whit asked me, he said, is it okay if I go? He needs to make sure that he's doing more of this and less of this, and I was like, I got it. And we just sat there and talked for 2 days, and it was the beginning, and we just became super close over the years. And that was also the day that even though we had already had one show under our belt, I realized Tom's effect on young artists, because so many people came up to the table and, they would stand there trembling and they would hand him something and he would be super nice, and I'll admit he might not have been super nice after they left. He was always, always very encouraging. But just he would say, okay, this is why you think this. This is why you should think this is good, and this is what you should look for this, and this is where they can work on things. And I don't ever mean to say he wasn't nice, but that was there. And we also had a discussion about MASH, the TV show versus the book, and I made some point, and he kind of gave me a look. And as it turned out, I was wrong and he was right, and he didn't correct me. Which I found out later was kind of a big thing. It was during Space that time that we both learned that we had both lost very close friends in very weird ways during high school, and it was just, a lot of things that, although people might look at us and go, you guys have nothing in common, we actually had a ton in common. Similar types families. Indiana and Ohio. And I'm just going to skip a lot of this because I also have eyesight problems, as some of you know, and so I can't read most of this with tear protein deposits in my eyes. Sorry if that got technical. And we didn't know, it wasn't, obviously, because even though we worked together in comics, it wasn't always comics. Just a few weeks ago, after a meeting, we went back to my house because I had cable to watch Game 7 of the World Series. And I know 90% of this room's eyes are going to glaze over because it's going to sports, and they're not going to know what we're talking about, but it was the Nationals versus the Astros. It was Game 7. I was rooting for the Nationals, and it was the 6th inning, and the Nationals were down, and they hadn't been able to get anything together during this game, and I was like, forget it. Let's just turn this off. This sucks. And he's like, no, wait. I'm like, what? And he goes, no, the Nationals, if you look at this season with the Astros, with this pitching rotation in, and with this lineup, and with the people that they're bringing in, they're going to come back, and they're going to score a bunch of runs, and they're going to win the World Series. I'm like, you were so full of... He was right. That's exactly what happened. I mean, exactly the way he described it is exactly what happened. And that was Tom. It didn't matter if it was comics or if it was sports. And Alex, I'll talk boxing with you. Or it was boxing. He was interested and knew and was so analytical and, like I said, always right. All right, even when he maybe wasn't, then he would figure out a reason to back end why he was. And I got a little crud about that for a little bit of time after that. I'm skipping some of this, sorry. And Jeff's right. Sometimes working with Tom, because we did work together pretty closely on CXC, could be a little infuriating. And I remember trying to get him to do some stuff, And I remember once he looked at me and he just kind of chuckled and he said, "You realize I don't do anything that I don't want to, right?" And I remember at the time being really kind of mad at him because it was something weird, but the more I thought about that and the more I internalized that, I realized that that just kind of represented Tom and everything that everybody has talked about tonight, that he did what he wanted to do and what he believed in doing, and he stuck to that path. And one of the things that he taught me, and those of you who know me well know that I'm going through a ton of changes in life right now. I'll be retiring from the job that I hate in February. This one's quite pleased about that. They can tell you how much it sucks. And you know the what happens with the duty over what happens with following your passions. And Tom's somebody who always followed his passions. And that's something that we should always do. And we had a CXC meeting last week, and we are going to keep it going. We've committed to one more year. And after we became friends and then closer, he used to say that he always felt better when I walked into a room, even before we knew each other really well. And I didn't get it at first until we had a meeting last week and he wasn't there. And it was just really hard. And I realized how well we played off of each other and worked together and just understood each other. And I also, just a piece of advice as I look through this, if you're exceptionally close to somebody and you're both kind of tech idiots who can't take selfies, don't be camera shy. You'll be sorry, like I am. And just remember I don't do anything I don't want to do, right? And take that home and make it count. And I've got other stuff, but I'll talk to people at the bar.
Caitlin is our last formal speaker.
Putting the words together to talk about Tom feels like an impossible feat. Tom, who on the fly, caught off guard and unprepared, could off the top of his head string together a comment on any and every topic imaginable, from comics to politics, cooking to old Hollywood stars, sports to biblical references, and it would always be the most intelligent, insightful, and creatively worded thing that you'd ever heard. Tom, who could cut someone down in an instant if he wanted to, or praise someone in such a specific and unique way that they've never been complimented in before, but somehow always needed to hear. And here I am, straight up reading something, prepared, which is about the least Tom-esque way to go about doing this. It almost seems to me that Tom took all the words with him. It has been such a pleasure to hear this evening from people who have known so many varied, glorious facets of the constellation of who Tom was. For me, this has been an opportunity to get to know him even better, and it's a great comfort. Although Tom was, above all, my very dear friend, to me and to many others, he was also an important advocate. When I first got to know Tom nearly a decade ago, he made me feel seen. He made me feel important when I really wasn't. He saw something in me early on when we met, when I was still working in Vermont, that I definitely did not see in myself, but he helped me cultivate it over the years by just believing in me. He took me seriously when others didn't, and in vouching for me and advocating for me, he made others think that there was a reason to do so as well. I owe him so much. And that was one of Tom's superpowers, making people feel like they were someone. Even if you were at the receiving end of a bad review, you were someone he was giving a bad review to. I had never lost a close friend before this, but Tom had, when he was far too young. As we've heard about this evening, the loss of Tom's best friend, Ethan, when he was in high school, devastated and shaped him into the person that we knew. A person who understood all too well the value of friendships and the fragility of life, and the unique family-like bonds that can be forged between friends. And I can tell you that there are few more perfect places for finding family-like bonds in this world than the comics community. Some of us, myself included, built a life in comics so immersive that it takes over everything like a warm, weird fortress. Comics, Tom said, was where he felt safe, where he felt the least scared. And that's what it is for a lot of us, doubly so when you've experienced a trauma like Tom had. I'm endlessly thankful to Tom for making it a safe and welcoming place for me. He was an essential and irreplaceable part of my comics family, my chosen family, and for some of us, that's the only family we have. There are so many stories I could tell you about Tom, like some of his big, sweeping gestures of support. During one of his visits to Columbus in 2012, before he moved here, I was in a really bad place and battling one of the worst depressions of my life, not taking very good care of myself at all. Tom was staying in a Columbus College of Art and Design dorm on the other side of the city. And knowing I was in a bad place, he spent an entire day of a short business trip cooking and packaging Tupperware after Tupperware of freezable foods for me. Dropped it off at my house in a cab so that he knew I would at least eat for a few weeks. He was a nurturer, a natural caretaker for the people in his life, which he valued too far above taking care of himself. But then there are all the little day-to-day things, too. Endless email and message exchanges numbering in the thousands. Hilarious jokes or observations sent just in the subject line. The way that Tom would pause a conversation and say, "How are you, really?" He showed up for everything, and all the secrets we traded. My last favorite memory of Tom is when he asked me to meet him clandestinely for a drink to talk about a romantic development. He had, apparently, met his match, and she felt the same, his intellectual equal. And when I arrived at brunch to meet him, it was the happiest I have ever seen him, ever. He was like a kid. He was actually trembling from excitement, nerves, and love. The fact that he would pass away within the first year of this relationship that he waited a lifetime for is the comic book ending that no one wanted. I take great comfort, though, in the fact that he was happy, and that face that greeted me at brunch is one that I'll always remember. One of the best ways that I have found to feel close to Tom since his passing is to read old posts from the Comics Reporter. His insuppressible voice rings through time and space and tells us, and tells generations to come, in brilliant, witty detail, about the time we all spent here together. The things we accomplished as individuals, the things we did as a community, the moments we celebrated and the heroes we lost. In the time I knew him, Tom, as the Comics Reporter, posted about every single milestone of my life. Job changes, birthdays, projects I'd worked on, blogs I'd written, even my engagement. Sometimes in too much detail. I kid you not, buried in one of his scene reports from June 29th, 2014, from a trip that involved a stop in Columbus before he moved here, Tom simply noted for some reason, "Caitlin McGurk very much needs to clean her car." So, embarrassing, but it's true, I still have to clean my car. In that way, though, Tom's work on the Comics Reporter was not just a documentation of comics. It was a documentation of individual lives, of my life, of our life. Every milestone, birthday, book deal, interview, event, tweet of interest, or new gig, Tom filed it away for us for perpetuity. He took the time to do it. He thought it important. This work that he, like so many of us, have dedicated our lives to. In his closing act, after a life dedicated to comics, Tom left his ashes to the Billy Ireland Cartoon Library and Museum, or what he referred to as comics' greatest place. So whenever you visit us, I hope that you can take comfort in knowing that you'll also be visiting Tom, comics' greatest friend. Thank you.
That was beautiful. Thank you to all of our upfront speakers. We're about to do open commentary. And I'll just let you know that the first hour of our program only lasted 2 hours and 10 minutes. So Tom would probably say we might want to tighten it up a little for this second part. But after we have, do we have a first speaker, Caitlin?
Yes, I'm sorry.
That's quite all right. And then I'll let you corral them.
And we also understand that people have to leave, so it's totally okay if you have to. But we'll do an open mic portion. Please keep your remembrances brief and meaningful. And our friend Bruce Crislip is gonna start that out. And if you'd like to continue from there, please kind of gather over here.
Kind of tough sledding. Fortunately, we have a big support group tonight. I think I'm going to need this. Tom Spurgeon had a habit of saying nice things about me behind my back. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't mind. It's just I wasn't used to it, this being the comics world and all. Once during a speech at CCAD, he called me the Johnny Appleseed of comics. He was referring to my ability to create a comic scene wherever I went. Specifically, he gave me credit for getting the Seattle comic scene off the ground. I guess that was my superpower. Another time, when he was still living in New Mexico, he came back for a space show. Afterwards, he wrote glowingly in the Comic Reporter about how great it was seeing me again at a space show here in Columbus. Went on for a couple of paragraphs, made me feel important. I was stunned, but it made me feel important. Tom and I were two sons of the Midwest who found ourselves in Seattle, washed up on the shores of Puget Sound. I got there in '81, Tom in 1994. Most of the writing I did for the Comics Journal was under Tom's editorship. And Tom was always very encouraging. When I'd pitch a new article idea, he'd say, "Write whatever you want to write. Whatever you do, I'm sure it'll be great." Wow, this is the Comics Journal? Well, okay. Tom's positive attitude toward my work was very liberating. He had faith in me. He had faith in my ability as a writer. He had lots of nice things to say about lots of people, but I feel he was sometimes hard on himself. Let me explain something here. If I explain this well enough, maybe I'll understand it. I thought I'd make it through. Anyway, Tom and I were both self-effacing, both self-deprecating. I see this as part of the Midwest ethos, which goes deep, and that is, don't brag. Don't brag. Don't stand out in the crowd. If someone gives you a compliment, you look down at the ground, murmuring, "Aw shucks," you kick a pebble and say, "I'm not really that good," Tom took the self-deprecating thing a little too far sometimes, beating up on himself for his supposed failings. After reading some of this stuff or hearing it on a podcast, you'd feel like saying, "Talk nice about my friend." The truth is, Tom never really knew how great he was. As far as I'm concerned, he was the most important person in comics. The Cartoon Crossroads Festival is just part of his legacy and the many friends he made here and, well, everywhere. That's another part. Tom had a real gift for friendship. At the last Cartoon Crossroads Columbus Festival, I told Tom how much I liked the book he co-wrote, Stan Lee, and you too, Jordan, and The Rise and Fall of the American Comic Book, which I had just reread. This is typical. He told me he wasn't happy with it. He felt it had been rushed out of print and was essentially a first draft. All the more impressive to me. I love that book, and I know I'll be reading it again. I miss you, Tom. Your great convention interviews, wonderful voice, your great writing, your empathy, your vision, your wit, your friendship. Tom often introduced me to people as, "This is Bruce, the I Like Comics guy." But Tom took it further than that. He didn't just like comics. He believed in comics, and he believed in us.
Hi there. My name is Christian Hoffer. I worked with Tom at CXC. And last few weeks I've been trying to think exactly what Tom was to me. And it wasn't too long ago that I realized Tom Spurgeon was my hero. And they say never to meet your heroes, but, and I was pretty sure that was going to be true for me too. He yelled at me once on Twitter, really, before I got to know him. And so the first time he was in town in Columbus, I was absolutely terrified to meet him. And so I got shit-faced drunk before I actually went up and talked to him. And, which is just like really weird because it's Tom. But Tom was my pal. And Tom just meant so much to me and my family. He's everything that I want to be. He's so great at writing about comics, and he was so loved by everybody. And God, he was so kind to me, so kind to just everybody here in Columbus. Last year in 2018, he asked me to join CXC as the operations manager, and by God, that was probably one of the happiest moments of my life, that he finally wanted me to do something and help him out on like a semi-permanent basis. Tom was always in my ear, usually through Facebook or something like that. He was the first person I told when my wife had a miscarriage, and he was the first person I told when we found out that she was pregnant again. And it's kind of hard to realize that, that sort of person is gone. And yeah, but Tom Spurgeon was my hero. I'm so happy that he came to Columbus. I was so happy that I got to spend time watching wrestling with him. I got to, everyone talked about how he was always the DM for Dungeons & Dragons. I got to be his DM for like 6 months, and it was great. And I'm so happy that it was part of my life, and I'm just glad that I got to know him. So I guess meet your heroes, and hopefully they turn out as well as Tom did. Thank you.
I don't know if you can hear, but people are wailing out there. I'm one of the people that Tom raised up. I know it was Tom who put me on the list of 100 top comics of the century. And I've gotten so much mileage out of that. It made me feel worthwhile. He was the reason I got a Master Award, because he liked what I was doing and how it was described, that people need to hear that their work is good, because what we do in private, alone, very little feedback. And for me as a female, practically no feedback in the early days, and even now. But he never let up. And the work I'm doing now, thankfully, I threw it in my car, my new project. When I came to the last space, and I saw him sitting there, it was like strange because he was by himself at the booth for CXC. I thought, I'm going to grab him. I got to show him this new work, see what he thinks, because it mattered what Tom thinks of my work. And he was so thrilled about it, he jumped out of his chair. We had to find a table because I had to lay out this stuff. I think you were there. And his response to me was that such that I felt that I had to work even harder and better and be bigger about it, because he designated me to be a master. He was taken aback at what I had done, and I still felt like I needed to raise up the game because of him. He believes. He believed in me. So I'll end my rambling little mess here quick because we're trying to course through this. My next book is about mourning and grief and loss. This is a place we go to. I call it Griefville, which made him laugh. Because I said it's kind of like hard to say, Griefville. So, to conclude, I will say, he will be in all of the pages. In fact, when I heard he passed away, first thing I did was go to my drawing table and work. I think it was a 16-hour slog. And thinking of coming today, I sat at the drawing table and did one of the best drawings I've ever done in my life with thoughts of him and what he gave me. And then this crazy thing came in my head. It's like DNA. He's our DNA as cartoonists. Tom is in our DNA. Comics is about, Billy Ireland is the DNA of comics. It's all here, the bones and the promises. And it's so fitting that Tom will reside here in the archives because of the DNA, which makes Billy Ireland now a sacred space for us.
Hi, I don't think Carol said her name, Carol Tyler. I didn't want to write anything. My name's Evan Dorkin. I'm a cartoonist. I didn't want to write anything because I figured it would not be up to Tom's standards. And he always said that I explained my concepts too much. And he said that in a review first. And here's the thing that people didn't get. I think one of the things that people didn't get about Tom was that if he was sometimes tactless, it was because he truly cared and he wanted things to be better. And I think one of the things that he understood, like a lot of people in this room understand, is that comics is a very, very screwed up place. It's a very emotionally messed up industry and a field and a fandom. And seeing that how Tom has come from so many other different places, you can understand how he was probably the most human person running through this, the thread of this field. Now, I first met Tom being mean to him. I yelled at him. He said, and I don't understand why, because I'm looking at the pictures and he could kill me. And when we used to talk about his football playing, I was like, why did I yell at you? Because I was stupid. I yelled at him in SPX because I was upset about a cartoon he ran when he was managing editor of the Journal. I thought that the cartoon was unfair and hit me hard without me being the target of it. I was just being dragged. And he agreed with me, but he didn't agree with me yelling at him. So we had a really interesting conversation, and that's how I met Tom. And we met angry, is what we would say. And he interviewed me for the Journal. I think it was 1999, and it was a mess. I was in a very bad place, and we spoke for 13 hours straight. I will not speak for 13 hours now. I kept saying, you can leave. I'll take you to the ferry. I mean, why don't you leave? And he goes, no, this is good. I want to talk. And I think that's when we became friendly, and then later on we became more friends. I think that comics and my life in general just got like 20% less human and 40% more stupid with Tom leaving. He was the hub for me of this industry. He connected people in a way that we are not able to, because myself, speaking for myself and many others in this industry, we're very fearful. There's a lot of anxiety running through this industry. There's a lot of people who work in a room by themselves, either because they need to be by themselves or they've been put there. I used to be able to talk to Tom about some of his deepest feelings, and one day I realized we were friends, and I just was so happy that such an amazing person would spend time talking to me and invite me into his home And he was this kind to my wife, to my child. And you'd watch him at conventions, and he would knock on the table and just check on people. He would say, "How are you doing?" He wanted to save everybody. He didn't want to save comics. He wanted to save everybody in comics, I think, more than anybody else. But one thing I can tell you is that he has changed my life, and I think others' lives who met him later in life, who became friendlier with him later in life. There are two ways I can tell you this. One is to emulate his behavior, is that, yes, if you were a dick at one point, that you can own up to that, and you can admit that you're changed, or that you were off one day, or that whatever, but you can connect to people afterwards. Tom would say things, we would talk about cartoonists, or we would talk about, he was surprised I knew anything about sports, because look at me. And then he ended up calling me Tanner Boyle. I told him Tanner Boyle was my hero as a kid. He's the rotten kid who gets into fights in Bad News Bears. And he said, that explains a lot about you. And he really liked that. But I mean, let's put it this way. Here's something that I wanted to mention. On his site and in his life and in what he did at conventions when he would check on you, nobody's doing that. Nobody really is going to be doing that now. I mean, look at the things he did on the Comics Reporter. And I didn't want to speak about the Comics Reporter. I didn't really want to speak about comics because that's the first thing everybody does. They have to bring it into comics, everything's goddamn comics, This thing was like Superman. But as a human, when I tweeted first, because I had to get it out of my body, when I tweeted first, I wanted to tweet about him as a human being, as a friend, as a person, and the hole in my heart that is not going to be filled. And then later you talk about the hole in comics, which is never going to be filled because we're not going to do it. I don't know how he did it, but because he was terrific. But he advocated for everyone. I feel as if I've met Whit and the family from him talking about them, but just through the reporter, because he would take photos of all the cartoonists that you would take and he would put them up. He didn't just want to talk about the damn comics. He wanted to talk about the people. He wanted to put a face to the name. And then he went further. If he didn't know who the people were, he sought out help. Let's put a face to the name of all these cartoonists. Then we can talk about their work. He advocated for older cartoonists. He advocated for newer cartoonists. And I felt if he ever said anything nice about me, I felt great. And if he said, I sought his approval, almost like a father or a brother. And if I didn't get his approval, if I got his criticism, I appreciated it because he was usually right. He was trying to make things better. On his site, he would always put up people in need, sites or people he was always talking about things like healthcare. And I remember him and Sarah would talk about, my wife, Sarah, had talked for hours about their ideas about healthcare in this industry. He was one of the only people engaging with these very, very important things. And then at the same time, he talked about Wonder Tot dancing on his site. And we actually, for Tom, we were working for the Cartoon Network. They were trying to find interstitials, and we pitched Wonder Tot dancing just for him. I don't think he believes we did it, but we really did. And we tried twice because I wanted Tom to see one of his dopey remarks. Somebody spent $400,000 on it, and they said, "Why do you want Wonder Tot dancing?" I said, "It's important. It's just it would be funny." I'm not going to tell him. I'm all dry mouth. I'm sorry. Real quick, he advocated years ago for somebody who needed help. I will not name names, but like Tom, maybe I'll tell you later afterwards. And here's the thing. I didn't have a lot of money. But I felt for this person after Tom put up the post. And he was doing this up to the last day. In fact, when the Comics Reporter was past its 10-year date, he was always putting up the advocacy for financial need. He was always talking about money. I remember how happy he was to give people money at CXC. I mean, he never talked about getting himself money, but when he gave Katie Skelly money, he was excited. He wanted all of us to make money, honestly. He was so human and so compassionate, and he understood how bad this industry was, and instead of just complaining about it, he was trying. Anyway, I'm sorry. He put up a post about somebody who needed some money. I sent the person some money. A couple of other people did too. I met this person at Mocha many years later, and they came up to me and thanked me because they said that they were suicidal at the time. Money that came into them that just from Tom's thing. And Tom was there too, and I saw them talking to each other. Basically, that's affecting life a lot. that is affecting a life directly. And I'm not taking credit for the money that I gave. I'm just saying this is the things that we're going to have to pass. We're going to have to keep doing, because Tom's not. There is nobody putting names to faces right now. None of the sites are going to do it. This industry can't do it. We're all too poor to get this shit. But we're all going to have to try a little, I think, extra hard in Tom's name to let people know when that there is a GoFundMe, unfortunately, for somebody's health. The least we can do is retweet these things. If we can't give $5, $3, Tom was always talking about how if he had the money, he would kick it in, and he would. He has reached out to so many people and helped them get to conventions, get through conventions, advocate for how we should act towards each other, and how we should act, how the industry can act better towards the people who make these things that we supposedly love. I don't think we could replace him. I think it's going to take a lot of us doing small things to replace Tom. And as a friend, no. I just know what it's going to replace. Thank you. I'm sorry.
I'm sure none of you know me, and that's A-okay. I'm Darcy. As Tom and my husband unfortunately know, I know no one. I will treat everyone the same, whether you're famous or not, to the dismay of some of you who are super famous, and I treat you like nobody because I have no idea who you are. And Tom, thankfully, had an appreciation for that. Tom would send me into a room with all these people, and he would just watch as I shut these people down, not knowing who they were, and just talk to them about nothing. And I love Tom for that. The fact that he knew that I had no idea of who these people were. I'm not a comics person. And that he appreciated my side of things, that I don't understand the culture of comics. I'm not part of that world. I live in a slightly different world with my husband attaching me to this bubble. But Tom would always come over to our house and just sit on the couch and we'd just talk. Yeah, there'd be sports on, because of course there were sports on. Basketball, football, whatever it was, wrestling, all the good WWE wrestling matches, you know. He'd have to come over and he'd stay there till it was done. I would go to bed and he'd be sitting talking with my husband for hours. But he'd come over and we'd just talk. And one of the things that I really respected Tom for is that he would get everyone's point of views. If he had something that was bothering him, he didn't want to make rash judgments. He wanted to make sure he had the opinions of people that were important to him, and for some reason he thought my opinions were important. He would come over and he'd ask me my honest opinion of a situation that I have no idea who these people are, and that's what he loved, is that I don't care who these people are. And I just give him my opinion of the situation. And I loved him for that. He became a member of our family, of our D&D group. Tom, I love him for everything, but you know, that guy had dice that he never brought over because he wanted to sit there and listen to my husband's story. He didn't want to play D&D just to play D&D. He loved the game of D&D. But he came over, his character was Lorgum, because of course it was Lorgum. You can just picture a Lorgum in your head. And he wouldn't roll the dice. He was a cleric that never healed. He never touched a weapon. He just sat there and observed. And my kid, he at one point during a battle said, "Oh, I'm going to go over and piss on the tree in the corner." And I'm like, "Of course you are, Tom. You're the cleric and we're all dying and you're pissing on a tree in the corner." But he would bring entertainment to everyone around him. In stressful situations, he would relieve all of that, and that's what I'm going to miss. I'm going to miss Tom, just being there for everyone. That's it. Thank you.
My name is Sheena Wolf. I'm going to keep this incredibly brief. I'm a syndicate editor. Tom worked in syndicated cartoons. I'm involved in CXC on the strength of Tom's pitch to the place where I work about how important the show was, what it meant to comics, and why my part of comics should be part of that, because I think most people don't think about newspaper comics anymore when they think about comics, but Tom was completely form agnostic. He was into all comics and all of the people who were in all sorts of comics. We became friends pretty quickly. We recognized, I think, fellow spiky weirdos who enjoyed comics. And a thing I always appreciated about Tom was that he always made time for me, and he also made time for everybody. So the thing that I wanted to say, that I wanted to just reiterate, because I think it comes across in the stories, is that Tom was very smart and could see who you were, but liked you anyway. And if he said that something was good, you knew it was good. And if he said something wasn't, that was true too. So I don't know what we're gonna do next, but I know that we're all going to have to do more. I think that Evan Dorkin completely had it right. And after I'd heard that Tom had passed, I knew that I needed to be better about reaching out to people, and I needed to be better about participating in things and continuing the work of comics community that Tom started. So that's all.
Hi, I don't know if you guys can hear me. My name is James Moore, just a local. I didn't get to know Tom until after his 2011 illness. So I always say that every day we had was a gift. And, I didn't get to know him until a few years after that. He did kind of a panel with me where he was the outside perspective on Columbus comics. And he even then believed in us so much and saw so much potential. And I'm just thankful that he found happiness and friendship here and that we were able to do that. But also I'm going to miss talking to my friend and hearing his stories. That's it.
Folks, that looks like it's it. I want to thank every single one of you for coming here. Tom would have been touched and kind of amazed. So this is great. Thank you so much.
And that was Tom's memorial. Evan Dorkin talked in there about the need to contribute, to give back, to support artists, and you definitely should do that, whether through Patreon, GoFundMe, buying their individual pages, however you can do it, and wherever they're in need. Now, in his own final wishes, Tom asks any donations you want to make in his name, go to the Billy Ireland Cartoon Library and Museum, and there's a link to that in the show notes for this one. Thanks again for listening, and thanks again to the organizers of the memorial for inviting me and for hosting the event and putting together the whole weekend. It was a wonderful tribute to Tom. I learned so much more about him, even though it's someone I'd known for almost 25 years. He had so many different aspects and touched so many different lives. I think we can all spend the rest of our days trying to measure up to his example. Now, again, my New York memorial for Tom will be held January 24th, 2020. Contact me for more info on that. And this show will be back next week with the annual year-end guest list episode where 2019's guests will tell us about the favorite books they read in the past year and what they're hoping to do next year. You can follow the Virtual Memories Show on iTunes and find all sorts of ways of listening at our website, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.